Retro.
Hey, this is Lauren Mary Kim, and I'm the stunt double for Ahsoka Tano in Clone Wars and the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we're going to step our toes into some comic discussion here with a look at Charles Soule's Legacy of Vader. But before we get into the latest from Kylo Ren, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
You bet, Dennis. We're on Facebook and Instagram very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this will be a full spoiler discussion of Legacy of Vader issues 1 through 6. The whole series is out now, so if you want to read all the way through 12, you can, but Jay and I were just picking it up for the first time recently. Real quick, the credits are, this was written by one of our favorites, Charles Soule, with art from mostly Luke Ross, but Stefano Raphael stepping in for an issue. The color artist was Nolan Woodard, letter was VC's Joe Caramagna, and the covers were completed by Derek Chu. So to set the scene, Jay, this picks up after the Battle of Crait. Kylo Ren is stepping into the role of Supreme Leader and then asserting his authority over the First Order, kind of putting General Hux in his place. And he's also dealing with the fallout of everything that's happened between him and his father Han Solo, Leia, Luke, Rey, and the like. And very much we got a theme of taking a quote from The Last Jedi, forget the past, kill it if you have to, or let the past die, kill it if you have to, versus legacy in this situation and taking power from your past. But what do you think about these first 6 issues overall?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that we're doing this. And I can't remember what was the impetus for us to jump into these, because I know we were talking about several things in our news discussion, and I know the possible Kylo Ren script / movie, Ben Solo movie that was out there, and then there was a few other things, but
It was the announcement of the fall of Kylo Ren by Charles Soule that we brought up the fact that we hadn't read these and discussed them yet, because we've discussed the rise of Kylo Ren on this show,
right.
but we had never gotten to this. So, and then there was also the notion that the rise of Kylo Ren, Legacy of Vader, and the fall of Kylo Ren are really a trilogy of series that tell a larger story. So that's what got us here.
Okay, so here we are, and I'm so glad that we are. So, yeah, this is a really fun batch of issues because I feel like they're much less about really Kylo Ren accomplishing anything tangible and just a lot more about deconstructing who he thinks Darth Vader actually was. And it's a very twisted little pilgrimage. And I love how Charles Soule is basically asking, what if Kylo Ren's understanding of Vader is basically completely wrong? And and there's just so many great things along the way that retells a lot of the portions of the story of Anakin / Vader that we know, but obviously Kylo Ren is getting them for the first time here, and it's also framing Kylo Ren in a way that he's really kind of at this precipice of almost like an identity crisis and figuring out exactly what all of these things mean. And as you said, the whole notion of kill the past, let it die, kill it if you have to, kind of thing. And just being a slave to his past and all the issues that go along with it. And then a very unexpected little tour guide, I guess you could say, along the way.
Right. Yeah. And we'll get into him in just a second. I just want to talk about the overall theme for just a second, because it's really going to influence a lot of what we have to say about these 6 issues as we go forward. But to me, the standout moment in the first issue that really tells you what this whole thing is about is that he's taken over the First Order. He's presented the the body of Snoke to all of his stormtroopers, like in halves. He has 2 boxes,
Yeah,
and he opens
very
them up, and there's Snoke,
unceremoniously.
and then he throws them out the hangar into space,
Right.
and he takes
Yeah.
over the First Order in this situation. And then, he's talking with Hux about what to do, and then he gets this moment where he is by himself and he's agonizing over things, and he's thinking about how he's killed his father, and Luke has perished in a way on Crait, and he basically wiped out the resistance, and Rey was sent running, and then he basically yells to himself, why am I not free? And he sees it as the situation where the past is what's holding him back, which feeds into this philosophy. We've said it numerous times in just the first 5 minutes of this podcast where, let the past die, kill it if you have to, if it's getting in the way of who you're meant to be in this situation. And, I'm thinking about that and how many times where it is the Lion King, Hakuna Matata, that was in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. What are you going to do going into the future? And so that is, it is a philosophy that has been presented to us very positively a lot of times in pop culture over the years. But, and we'll get into this in just a second, this advisor is also saying it's like, you can't kill your past. It's always going to be with you. It's shaped who you are in this situation. And Vader, this person that you're trying to emulate, drew power from what happened in his past. So there's these 2 big competing ideas that are really kind of the thesis statement for this entire series.
Yeah, and I never thought of his guide as being sort of like Rafiki, but now I can't unsee that. But I think also in this definitely in this first issue where Kylo is looking at Vader's mask and he says, "How did you do it all those years?"
Mm-hmm.
And and obviously Vader's mask never responds to him, but so Kylo is left wrestling with himself. And like I said, he's at this real precipice. And I have to say that, Hux in this particular episode, in this edition, I don't know how I feel about him, because of obviously where we know Hux ends up. And unfortunately, he's been the butt of a lot of jokes, but I feel like he was written as being pretty competent in these particular issues. And I kind of felt for him in a way that it's like, dude, I'm doing everything that I probably should be doing and more, and you're not happy, and there's always this power struggle. I mean, and Kylo wants a throne. Like, come on, really?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. So we can put a whole the whole Kylo Ren story for a bit, and we can talk kind of about Hux throughout these episodes. And yes, Kylo has returned to the Finalizer, his flagship, and he's basically asked Hux for an update on what's going on. That mainly what he talked about with Snoke was matters of like the dark side and Rey and things like that. But the bigger military perspective was not something that he was in on. So now he's asking for Hux, as an advisor role about this. And then Hux takes this as an invitation to like, we should go conquer this planet and we should do this. We need shipyards because we've lost our killer base and we've lost, what was the name of the Snoke's flagship? Can't remember. Doesn't matter. But basically his point is that we need what we need right now is more ships. We are the dominant force in the galaxy, but we can't hold unless we have more material. We need more ships. We need to go capture a shipyard, and I'll get started. And then Kylo stops and is like, did I order you to do any of those things? And
Right.
Hux is like, no. And he's like, no. So what you need to do is build me a throne. And there's also this other statement where, Hux is making this point that, we can do something that our forebears had never done. And Kylo is cruel in this moment. He says, like, our forebears, my forebears are the people that shaped the galaxy. Your forebears are lieutenants and lickspittle,
Yeah.
in this situation. So let's not get carried away with whose forebears did what in the galaxy. So he's not missing an opportunity to try and put Hux in his place. And look, it's the, you know, uh, to borrow a phrase, how much sympathy do you have for the devil? Hux is not a good person, right? But at the same time, it's like you can have a little empathy for this guy, that he's got grand visions and he's got this guy above him that he's enthusiastically trying to tell him about them. But it's almost like Kylo's rejecting it just for the simple fact that Hux told him this is what it was
Yes.
he was thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, throughout all of these issues, Hux's military strategy is actually pretty sensible.
Mm-hmm.
And Kylo is basically after symbolism and, like I said, this power struggle and the one upping Hux like the whole time. And you could just tell that Hux is so frustrated and he doesn't even know how to talk to him. He's basically saying, well, you are the supreme leader, and we could do this, 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 and this. And like you pointed out, Kylo's like, did I ask you for that? Am I your superior? Aren't you my inferior? He says this to him several times, so you can understand why Hux is just like, dude, like, get over yourself.
Right. And there's a great example of all this when they get to Corellia and the later part of these 6
Mm-hmm.
issues, because Hux has made the point, it's like, we need shipyards. We need to repair ships. We need to build new ships. And, so he points out Corellia is a place we could take over. So Hux has designed this entire plan to take over Corellia. And when they get there, the battle's going well for the First Order. And he's giving this speech to everyone on the deck of the flagship. It's like, this is a group effort. We're doing such great things. And then Kylo just goes tearing, like upends all the plans.
Oh
He's
yeah.
in his own starfighter. He's attacking like the most fortified place on the planet. He's telling all these other pilots to keep everyone off of him, this, that, and he's successful. And then he shows back up on the ship and he's taking credit for everything. And then Kylo bites his tongue, or Hux bites his tongue, but then in private he tells Kylo Ren, look, it's like, that was courageous, it was successful, well done, but you made this needlessly difficult for the rest of us. If you had told me that that's what you're going to do in the beginning, I would have wasted all this time on these other plans. I could have created a plan that would have better supported what you wanted to do. And then, as you were just saying, Kylo's response to that is like, oh, I'm being represented by my inferior in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that's like, I think it's one of the things that Charles Soule's trying to point out here, is that there is some immaturity to Kylo in all of this. It's like,
Definitely.
why do you have to go that route, Kylo? It's, that's the type of feedback you'd want from an officer that you tasked with something. It's like, I had this great plan. Your plan was good too. But if you told me that's what you wanted to do, we could have made yours even better in the situation. And Kylo's like, you just kind of have to deal with my whims. Well, what kind of leadership is that?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, the whole way that Kylo Ren is framed in these issues does make you think to yourself, gosh, he really did have it. He didn't have a perfect life, but he had a good life up to
Mhm.
where he decided to reject it all. And now he's scrambling for a legacy. And yeah, and like I said, Charles Soule really sets us up for, did he really even understand his legacy in the first
Yeah,
place?
right. So let's get back into a bit more of the main body of the story here. So Kylo's decided to run with he's going to kill us past, starting with Vader. So he goes to Mustafar. He
Hmm.
fights some Mustafarians. I laugh every time I say, 'cause I think of Rastafarians, but whatever. But he gets up to Vader's palace, which we find out would only open for someone that had some of Vader's bloodline in them.
Hmm.
And he meets none other than Vaneé in there.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, Vader's, I don't know what you would call him, right? Major domo,
Yes.
the
It's like concierge.
consigliere of some sort,
Hmm.
right? Except Vaneé is no longer a whole being anymore. His head is floating in a tank that's attached to a droid body of sorts.
Very
And
Bomar Monk feeling.
you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I
Mhm.
was just about to say in that moment. And Vaneé is now is proposing that he can help Kylo find out what Vader's legacy is and what Kylo's been missing this entire time, so that he can become this like heir to Vader's legacy here. All right. That's what happens. What'd you think of Vaneé?
Oh, I thought he was fantastic because
Mm-hmm.
I mean he's almost manic in a way. He's looking at this whole exchange, if you will, between Kylo Ren and the Mustafarians at the temple, and he's like, "Ooh, pretender or prince?" And it's almost like you can envision him if he had a mustache to twirl, like he'd be like, "Ooh, ha, okay, who do we have here?" kind of thing. And so Vaneé is almost giddy when Kylo gets to him, and he's ready to show him his entire legacy, and he's like, "Okay, this is what you want. Let's do this." And so that's where I was getting into like the whole twisted pilgrimage thing, and
Yeah.
I really dig Vaneé as the way that he was presented here.
Isn't it something that this character that basically had like what, one or two lines in all of Rogue One has now taken on this like major
Yeah,
significance in what is
I
our
love
current
it.
expanded universe in this
Uh-huh.
regard?
Yep,
Excuse me.
yep.
And so he's basically Kylo's guide, but he is the opposite of Kylo's philosophy. Kylo is, I'm going to kill the past so that I can be set free and I can become the person I want. Where Vaneé is like, that's the wrong approach. The
Mhm.
person you're trying to emulate, which is Darth Vader, was fueled by his past. Although he never looked back, it's the things from his past that made him who he is and gave him the ability to become everything that he was in the future. So
Right.
it's kind of an interesting opposition that these two characters have. So the first place Vane takes Kylo is to Tatooine, and he takes him to Watto's shop, and Kylo keeps jumping into conclusions like, "Oh, Vader must have come back and got revenge." Like, no, Bonnie's like, "No, that's not what happened." And then he takes him to the Boon to Eve Classic race circuit, which is now in complete disruined, in disrepair, and it's ruined. They get a couple of thugs try to hold them up, and Kylo gets rid of them, and then Bonnie points out, well, it wasn't Watto, wasn't his first order. There was Gardula the Hutt, and she's still here.
Mhm.
And not only that, Vaneé has apparently made a deal with her that she's supposed to try and break him. What do you make of all this?
Well, backtracking to when they first get there, and as you pointed out, when Kylo says, "Why are we here? This is a nowhere planet." And Vinay instantly says, "Not to Lord Vader, my prince, and therefore not to you." And so I love that he recounted all the ways that Tatooine mattered to Vader slash Anakin. And he said, "Your father was an inferno. His past was the fuel." So as you pointed out, he keeps saying, "No, you need to embrace your past. You need to embrace your past." And Kylo says, "Well, how do you know all of this, first of all?" And so Vaneé basically tells him, "Well, Vader told everything to Palpatine, and then when Palpatine died, then I accessed all of his files." And I love the fact that Kylo said, "But Palpatine used Vader." And
Mhm.
Vaneé gets like so giddy and says, "Well, yes, but in such a wonderful way. We should all be so lucky." I was like, "Whoa, that is so twisted."
Mhm.
So I loved that, and the fact that they go to the pod racing track first, and the fact that Kylo was appalled that he finds out that Vader was a slave as Anakin, and that his
Mhm.
mom was a slave too. So that was a big thing for him. And um and then Vanne says to him that Vader walked a path of pain, and says to Kylo, "You too walked a path of pain." And, Ben slash Kylo's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, I did." But yet he's remembering all of these wonderful things that happened to him in his upbringing. And it's obvious that he was not on the same level, kind of thing. So that's what I was saying, like, he was luckier than he thought that he was. But, and then they end up killing the guys that come to the pod racing, and saying, "Oh, yeah, Anakin Skywalker," and they talk about Luke, and then Kylo kills them and says, "Talking about Luke Skywalker will get you killed." So then that's when they get to Gardula, and I think the fact that, to answer your question, that Vanne set Kylo up for that is kind of twisted and brilliant at the same time, because I think he kind of sensed that maybe Kylo didn't have enough pain to fuel him. And so bringing all of this stuff to his attention and then making him physically go through a lot of that was a big part of it. But I have to ask you, when Kylo was going through the torture and he was hearing like the voices and he was seeing the images and he was hearing like the word obey, obey, obey several times over. Was that just pain induced, or do you think that Gardula did something
No, that was Gardula.
to
That was absolutely
yeah,
Gardula.
yeah.
Over the transmission, basically. Okay, so what I was getting at with my question was this: is that why would
Sorry, I
Vaneé?
totally got off track.
That's all right, but Vané's bringing Kylo on this pilgrimage to Tatooine to learn his past, and it was some of the things you're talking about. It was interesting that Kylo had no idea that Vader was a slave, and it makes me wonder: is like, well, in this continuity, I can't remember what the word was on what Luke and Leia learned about Anakin Skywalker in his past. Do they know Shmi Skywalker was their grandmother? Or do they know that he was a slave on Tatooine? I think they knew he came from Tatooine, but regardless, what did they not know, and why didn't they pass that on to Kylo? Okay, that's interesting in its own right, but we don't have the answer to that. But this whole deal with Gardula is that look, we hear plenty of stories that when kids enroll or enlist, I should say, in the Army and the armed forces, they go off to basic training, they get broken down so they can be rebuilt into the person that the military wants them to be, which is an oversimplification. But the whole idea is that, learn discipline, learn the chain of command, this, that, and the other. And you do that through, I don't want to say like inhumane, but harsh circumstances, right?
Sure.
We've all seen depictions of what basic training is like that. And so I get what Vaneé may have been after, which is this is a person that is high and mighty. They don't think that they have anything to learn from anybody, but I've got them, salivating for this opportunity to rewrite their own family history. That's the other thing that stands out about this, is that Kylo is not just necessarily about killing the past. He's like editing the past to all of this. The idea that Anakin Skywalker, Vader, his grandfather might have been a slave, really makes him angry and all this. Well, forget the past, let it die, kill it if you have to. Why can't you just forget it? Why does he have to go do anything about that? So that suggests to me that he hasn't bought into his own philosophy as much as he claims he has. So he goes off to confront Gardula. And the point is he's going to eliminate Gardula, and then nobody will know that that's Vader's past, that that's no longer part of his family's lineage. And so when he's being broken down, I think it's also part of a, as we will hear Vaneé say later, Vader hated himself, and Kylo's going to try and come up with a proxy for hating himself here in a bit. And this is kind of like, this is a part of your past. I'm going to break you down, make you confront it so that you have to deal with it and you can draw power from that. And it doesn't quite go the way Vaneé thinks, because, Kylo gets out, he contacts the First Order, he goes to assault Gardula's base, and then he calls down a First Order strike on his own location to completely wipe out any evidence of their existence, which I think says a lot.
Yeah, so you have in here, there's a couple things that he eliminated Anakin's name from the winners list on the Boon to Eve. Do you think
I
that
was going
that
to
was
ask you, is like that, I couldn't tell. Is that what he was doing, or was he just defacing the thing as in general?
I don't
Because
know, but that's a great question because I
yeah,
could see him doing that, quite honestly, in this situation.
because I was trying to figure out what he was doing, because I couldn't read it, because it's not like we got to see what was printed on that part of the panel as he drags his lightsaber across it. He's just dragging his lightsaber across it. So
Mhm.
I wasn't sure if that's the way you took it or not, that he was trying to wipe out that part of Anakin's legacy. And if he was, why? Because that was a major achievement for Anakin.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I hadn't even thought of that as being
Mhm.
a possibility, but I think it makes sense. It definitely tracks with what Kylo is trying to do. And then my other question, kind of a weird one, but what the heck was that little like foam bubble thing that Gardula had that was obviously force sensitive as well, that was kind of his little advisor that, basically told him, "Oh, you better not kill him or you're going to be sorry." You know what? With the thing with the big eyes, I've never
Yeah,
seen
I know
anything
exactly
like
what
that
you're
before.
talking about, but I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And if there's anything
Like
I'm
a spit
disappointed in
bubble.
this series, is that they teased us with that, and it was just kind of like, what because here's the other thing about it is like the one issue ends with that creature using the Force to yank away Kylo's lightsaber.
Mhm.
And then it shows up in the next issue when Kylo's in the dungeon away from Gardulla's palace being tortured. And you're right, this creature is telling Gardulla, advising it about, not killing it. This could be a problem, whatever. And then we never see it again. The whole place gets blown up. We don't know its name. We don't know where it
Right.
came from. We don't know what it is. I mean, it didn't strike me as being anything significant. And I don't know if me being lapsed in all my thoroughness of Star Wars comic reading would have revealed the answer to that, but I was a little frustrated by that, Gardulla makes this point that when she learned the lesson that Jabba failed to learn, like when Luke showed up and basically wiped out all Jabba and all of the people that are in his palace, that she had to have a counter for that. Well, that's great. Who is this? uh,
Mhm.
yeah, that's just kind of a weird open question.
Yeah, for sure. And, the fact that also when Gardula starts to really torture Kylo, he starts to bargain with her and then reveals his identity and says, "You're gonna be sorry. I've been gone for days. They're
Hmm.
gonna come looking for me." And she's like, "Days? It's only been like an hour, dude."
Hmm.
And that was just like, wow, that must have really been severe. But yeah, during his vision too, when he sees Vader, I love the quote that Vader says, "Everything that made me magnificent, I did alone."
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a standout for me.
Right. Because right after Kyle asks him for guidance is when that comes up.
Mhm.
And Anakin's like, and Anakin slash Vader is like, you want me to give you guidance? Is like, no, I paved my own way. So don't come muling to me, which I think had to be quite the rebuke for Kylo after he spent
Mhm.
years force praying, meditating over Vader's helmet all that time. The other thing that stood out to me is while Kylo is being tortured, he utters, "There is no pain, there is only power." And you can tell he's getting ready to say power before he gets cut off with another torture shock on that. And I was like, wait, what is this? Because it's not part of the Jedi code, it's not part of the Sith code, but it
Mhm.
seems like it's his own, it seems like it's some derivation of a Force user code on that in that way.
Yeah, no, that's a good catch because it's almost like a mantra that
Mm.
he's repeating.
Right. You know, we've been doing the Darth Bane book. It's like, peace is a
This is
lie.
a lie. Yep.
There's only passion, right? And when I saw this, I was like, immediately looked up the Sith code and was like, wait a minute, is you part of? And it's like that doesn't remind me of any part of the Sith code, and it's not. It's not part of the Sith code. So I'm wondering what that's from, and if we'll hear more of it at some point.
Do you think that Kylo Ren ever did any studying into the actual Sith lineage? Like akin to what Darth Bane did, or was he just working off of what he quote unquote knew?
I don't think he did. Based on what we've seen in the Rise of Kylo Ren and his history,
Mhm.
he was part of Luke's academy, and then much like Anakin was getting guidance from Palpatine, Kylo was going and getting guidance from Snoke. However
Mhm.
he found that being on the Amaxian station. Is that what it was called? That also showed
Maxian
up in the
station, yeah.
right, yeah, in the High Republic. And I don't ever get the feeling that he was interested, involved in, or whatever with the Sith, because when he left Luke and the Jedi, he took up with the Knights of Ren. And
Mhm.
having read ahead in the series, I can tell you they're going to come up. But I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have anywhere that he really bothered spending time looking into the Sith because they're gone, as far as
Mhm.
he knows. So,
It's part of, like, killing his past is what you're saying, and not even
well,
paying attention to it.
I think it was, yeah. I think by the time he came around to that mantra of kill your past, let the past die, he hadn't and looked into the Sith, and there was no reason to. He was already powerful in the Force, and what would he look to the Sith to gain that he didn't already have? I don't think it is until Palpatine reemerges in the Rise of Skywalker, which takes place after this. There really isn't any thought that the Sith are relevant anymore, I think, in the galaxy. So why would he bother?
Yeah, if nothing else, though, I mean, if he's truly interested in killing the past, you at least need to learn about it. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Sure, but that the Sith legacy has nothing to do with him. It's not,
Sure. Mhm.
okay, look, you know, to borrow part of the Sith code for this discussion, my chains are broken. Right now, his chains are his path. The Sith legacy, other than him like trying to do what Darth Vader wanted, which was wipe out the Jedi, that's all he cared about. There's
Mhm.
nothing, there's nothing about the Sith legacy that is part of Kylo's past that he's aware of that's impacting him.
Mhm.
So I don't see it being any interest to him.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on into issue 4. This is when Vaneé takes Kylo to Naboo. It's fascinating issues. Jay.
Yes.
He gets there, and his view of this planet is that this is exactly what he hates. They've gotten so wrapped up in lineage, so wrapped up in their past, and so wrapped up in the way that things are and were that they've gone stagnant. They've festered as a civilization, and they're no longer capable of evolving, of achieving anything. And he's realizing this the entire time that he's in Padme's lakeside retreat and being shown around. He doesn't even let like Vaneé get the words out, right? I mean, he's trying to explain the significance of this place. And he's like, why should I care? It's a lakeside
Yeah.
mansion. And this, that, and the other. And then Vane's trying to talk to Palpatine. He's like, Palpatine's dead. Why do I care? And then Vaneé finally gets the opportunity. You got to love Vaneé, how patient he is and that he understands Kylo. It's like, okay, put up with the tirade. And then it's like, yes, everything you said true, but this is where Vader fell in love with his wife, and this is where they got married, and all these things. And so, anyway, while they're there, Kylo decides, I am going to reshape this world, and so he comes and he orders the First Order to basically lay siege to this planet, and then leads a resistance against them. There's a lot of nuance here that escaped me the first time I read this issue. I've now read these first 6 issues twice. The second time, I absolutely loved it and reveled it. But what did you think about this portion of the story?
Well, again, as you were saying before, I think that Vaneé is very patient with Kylo, and he sees the bigger picture of what Kylo needs to do to truly not only embrace his legacy, but also to, as you said, reshape it. And I love the exchange where he's talking to Kylo about his grandfather's past, and as you mentioned, this is where he fell in love, and then all of a sudden Kylo's like, wait, so you're telling me that I have to fall in love in order to be able to, like, truly feel this pain? Because Vanna kept saying this is even more of a factor than Tatooine was. This
Right.
is huge. You need to really understand this. And I was just cracking up at that because I was like, you're not seeing the point. So, to your point earlier, as far as the way that Kylo is depicted in this, he really is depicted as being extremely immature in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of ways. And, even more so than, Anakin always got a bad rap for being a big whiner and such. And this really reframes Kylo in a way that he, like I said, he was really struggling with a lot of this stuff. And when he did the whole double agent thing, at first I was like, what the heck? Really? He's wearing like these motorcycle goggle things and trying to, be the masked man that no one's going to recognize who he is with or without his mask. So I don't even think it really necessarily mattered because these people probably don't know who he is in terms of the First Order. Because even when he takes off his mask, they're like, oh, we can finally see the person that has saved us. So, I mean, in
And he will
some
never
ways,
forget you. Oh, really?
yeah, yeah. And I'm going to kill you all now that you've seen me. I have to kill you
You
kind of
said the wrong
thing.
thing.
Yeah. But, Vanna setting him up in that way, he even calls him out on it and says, your little ridiculous tirade of setting all of this up. But I think in a twisted way, he wanted Kylo to do something like that. And so I was a little ambivalent about it because I was thinking to myself, oh, you're right, Vanna. This is ridiculous. Like, what the heck are you doing, Kylo?
Yeah.
And then, of course, Hux is none the wiser to any of this. He's communicating with Kylo and he's like, "Oh, how's the siege going?" And, "Oh, yes, we will have them And oh wait, how are they knowing all of these things? And they're going for our ventral cannons and da 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 da. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is just crazy, but it's also brilliant in a way too. What do
Yeah.
you think?
Well, there's two things that are happening here. It's like, and basically Kylo doesn't realize that he's kind of proving Vané's point in this, and that Vaneé brings Kylo to Naboo for this lesson. This is where Anakin Vader met his wife. This is where he fell in love. This is where he got married, and this is where Anakin started to adopt the philosophy that it also happened on Tatooine. Tatooine was the first place that he touched the dark side because of loss, and that loss allowed him to fuel his rage and then touch the dark side. And in here, Vader acquired something that he was willing to do anything for. And so when you talked about earlier that Kylo was like, "Oh, I have to fall in love in order to become who I meant," and Vane's like, "No, idiot! It's you." Vader found something that he was willing to do anything for, that he would break down any barrier to accomplish, and that was Padme.
Mhm.
He would do anything to keep her alive. He would be without limit. Kylo says, "Well, I'm without limits," and Vanna's like, "Yeah, are you really?" And then that line you alluded to, Vaneé says, like, you've got to stop this. You're inventing these ridiculous reasons to attack the First Order because it's a proxy for you. Vader, when he first became a Sith, I'm sorry, when Vader first became a Sith, what fueled him the most is because he hated himself. He hated what he had done. He hated who he became, and that hate is what fueled him. Kylo is essentially doing the same thing. He doesn't have an attachment like Padme. So what he's got is the First Order. So he's encouraging the Naboo to attack the First Order. He's essentially attacking himself because he hates
Yeah.
himself, trying to create that. But it's so far removed from what Vader have that it's comical. And that's why Vaneé uses the word ridiculous in this situation. You're trying to recreate that whether you realize it or not. And then he goes on to say, so like, we are our past, whether we like it or not. Quit wasting your time on these silly games. Find an enemy that's worthy of yourself. Kylo, he doesn't say it out loud, but he realizes Vaneé is right. And he
Mhm.
calls off the First Order. They have a dreadnought in space ready to wipe out this city that he's been leading the resistance from. And then he just ups and runs. And then that's when the conversation comes in where that guy that's from the resistance is like, thank you. Like, we can't believe this. We'll never forget you. We've seen your face. And Kyle's like, oh, you've seen my face. And then the next panel is they're
Yeah.
all dead.
Right.
It's like, can't have that. And then, they're off on to the next part. So, we got one less issue to talk about, but it's kind of a transition issue where not as much significant happens compared to what's going to happen in the next 6 issues. But do you think Kylo's come around is the question at this point. For this entire time, his philosophy has been, if I'm going to be who I'm meant to be, then I have to forget the past, kill it if I have to, so that I am free to become that person. But the more time he spends with Vaneé and all through, whether it was with the setup with Gardhula and now the situation on Naboo, the point's been made. We are our past, whether we like it or not. There's power to be gained from there. What do you think? Is Kylo come around or not yet?
Well, I wrote down a few questions for myself, particularly, and also to get your view on it in terms of this. And, there's a few things. Is Vanny really helping Kylo or proving that he's never going to equal Vader? Like, is he truly trying to get him to break out of that legacy? Because I don't know if Vanny agrees with the fact that he is trying to kill the past. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think he kind of directly tries to contradict that in some ways. And I think that Kylo also kind of really misunderstands Vader by ignoring Anakin in all of this. So he's chasing that Vader legacy, but he's ignoring the Anakin part of it too. And so yeah, so I just think that Vanny also is he's a guide. And as we see, obviously in issue 6, even Kylo reaches back out to him via hologram and is like, "Oh yeah, hey, what are we doing next?" kind of thing. Where are we
Mhm.
going next? So I'm really not sure if Kylo's really learning anything from this because I don't know if he ever truly learns that Vader's strength came from loss. You know what I mean? So how
Well,
do you feel about those things?
okay, yeah. It's interesting because I'm trying to decide what it is that Charles Soule thought about when he, Brian Johnson's Last Jedi, and there's that statement from Kylo. He's telling to Rey, it's like, forget the past, kill it if you have to, if it's standing in the way of who you're meant to be. And okay, that's an interesting point, but I don't think Vaneé is so interested in this obscure notion of, well, who's Kylo supposed to be? He's interested in Kylo becoming as powerful as he can be. And the way that Vaneé sees it is like, you are flailing. You don't have a purpose. You're not fighting to defend anything. It's not, Kylo doesn't even, he got this loose notion of conquering the galaxy with the First Order. He's made himself supreme leader. He declares himself to be Naboo's king, but it's
Yeah.
like, but you can tell there's like no passion behind that, right?
Mhm.
Contrast
Mhm.
it with Vader. It's like, he was doing anything from Padme, and then afterwards he hated himself so much he was taking it out on the galaxy, and then that turned into he hated Palpatine, and so someday he was going to take down Palpatine, and he was just a plant. Well, then what would have been after that for Vader? It still came back to this kernel that he hated himself for what had happened in his attachment to Padme. Kylo has nothing that he's really fighting for.
Mhm.
And his idea is that I'm going to get rid of everything from my past so that this obtuse vision of the future can come to be. Well, what is that, Kylo? And I think that's Vane's point. It's like, you're striving from some unnamed, undefined future, but you have nothing that is your North Star, your pole star in this quest. Vader found that, and the other thing is that Vaneé and Kylo never refer to Vader as Anakin. You kind of
No.
alluded to that a
Yep.
second. It's always Vader. That they don't, and point you made earlier in this conversation is that there's this no notion that there was this other person named Anakin that became Vader, that was good, that did good things, that was trying to do right by the galaxy while defending Padme. I think they're both off now that we're talking about this in that way. They just think of the guy that fell to the dark side, and Kylo was trying to emulate him, but he did. And I think Vanna would point out, you can emulate him all you want with like killing Jedi, but there was a reason Vader was killing Jedi. Why are you killing Jedi
Mhm.
in this
Mhm.
situation? What is your reason to Etra in this? And I think that's what Vanna is getting at. In which one is right? I'm not entirely certain. I mean, we all beat ourselves up for mistakes we made decades ago. And at some point, it's like you have to like come to peace with those things so that you can get on your life and you can make, yes, but you don't forget it. You don't kill that. You learn from it. So
Right.
I think the answer is somewhere between their two positions. And I don't think that's a cop out. I think it is. I think both those positions are extremes, and the truth is in the middle.
And, I think it's also very sneaky of Charles Soule because every step along the way in these issues reminds us that Darth Vader only existed because of Anakin Skywalker's love,
Mhm.
his grief, his fear, and his eventual redemption. And, that just makes the case for what an incredibly rich character Darth Vader has always been. And as far as reaching that level, I don't think anyone will ever do that. And I truly believe that Kylo Ren had to find his own path because, as you said, it's just he was killing without any purpose. It was just slaughter. He didn't really have a clear path at all. And Vaneé drops an interesting little breadcrumb though in issue 5 when he says, he accuses Kylo of being lost, and he tells Kylo that there's a vault on Mustafar that can give him his answers, but Vanny refuses to really tell Kylo all about it. He's like, I'm not gonna show it to you. You
You're
got
not
some
worthy
things to
yet.
do here first.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to find yourself that enemy that's worthy of you. And I just thought that was really, really interesting little breadcrumb.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, some observations I'm going to save until we can get to the next two issues at this point. But I want to get into the last issue here, issue 6.
Mhm.
So they get on with the conquest of Corellia, and they basically conquer the planet. And This is what I was referring to earlier when Kylo charges into battle after Hux had carefully made plans to siege the planet and take it all over. Kylo finally has his throne, and then Vaneé finds a Jedi on the planet Lati in the mid-rim. And we don't get a whole lot of chance to meet her, except for this is a snowy, it's in the mid-rim, but it's kind of a backwater world type of place, not terribly advanced. Kylo shows up in a tavern. I thought of like Dungeons and Dragons campaigns when you only start in and end or whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but he shows up at the bar and then he's like, hey, and it's a Western in a way. It's like, you've seen anyone unusual around here? And the bartender immediately responds like, well, I mean, other than you.
Yeah.
And then Kylo immediately melts down. It's like, oh, this is ridiculous. And starts trying to pull all the information he wants out of the bartender's head, which is, where is this Jedi? And she shows up. She's some sort of a Nick-2 at the end and uses the Force to take away Kylo's lightsaber and like mentions, oh, you got to crack the Kyber crystal here. And then that's where the issue ends in this. And like I said, I've read ahead on this and there's a very interesting issue coming up after this. Any significant observations you want to make off this last issue before we wrap up?
Well, again, just to reiterate your point about the whole thing with Hux, and I was really frustrated for Hux in that, and he was really trying to be, a strategist when it came to all of this, and then here comes Kylo with his, complex of having to one up him all the time, and the fact, well, Kylo has his throne now, which didn't really look all that impressive, but whatever. He was happy with it. He said it was fine. And the fact that this is such a small detail and it's very silly of me, but that Kylo orders wine. He's like, I'll have wine. Like, really? Like, dude, get like a port in a storm or something. Like, wine. I'll have some wine.
Question I'll have for you, since
That
you were
just
talking about Hux.
cracked me up. Go ahead.
Yeah, but with Hux, it's like, I was really disappointed how he came off in The Rise of Skywalker.
Yes.
And, in The Force Awakens, he is a true believer. He's competent. He's leading armies. He's a trusted military general under Snoke. Over the course of The Last Jedi, he deteriorates a little bit. And, it's, Snoke yanks him up to the ceiling and, and then Kylo abuses him later in the movie and stuff like that. And by the time we get to The Rise of Skywalker, he just hates Kylo so much that he's helping the Resistance, and it's so unearned in that regard. And he really becomes a shadow of the guy he was in The Force Awakens. But do you feel like he gets any type of redemption in his character portrayal in these issues? Because I kind of feel like he does. He comes off as much more thoughtful, much more competent in the plans that he was laying. I have more empathy for him, no sympathy, because again, he's a villain, but with him addressing Kylo, which is like, you're in charge. Yeah, sure. But just, kind of tell me what you're thinking so that we can not work at cross purposes on this. That's not unreasonable in this situation. The way he was trying to build up all the officers underneath him when they were attacking Corelli before Kylo charged in, he came off as a much more competent leader than what we got in Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it, again, as you were saying, it's just unfortunate the way that he ended up being portrayed in The Rise of Skywalker, because obviously he knows what he's doing. He's, as you said, he's very competent. He knows strategy, he knows military, he understands. I mean, he was trying to talk to Kylo Ren as the supreme leader, that he respected his position, even though he probably wanted that position, but he knew he never was going to get it anyway. But he was okay with the fact that, yes, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to serve the First Order. I mean, he even had a little bit of a speech about that, how perfect the First Order is, and he was very proud of what he was doing. So yes, I really do feel that Hux was portrayed very much more favorably in these comics than we got him on screen.
Yeah. Maybe they should bring in Charles Soule to help write like a future movie or something like that. I just think he is so great with everything he touches. He understands Star Wars. He knows so much of the the depth of the characters, of the universe, of the lore, and everything else. Now, I don't know what he's ever done with screenplays, so maybe he's not well suited for that. But I've loved all of his stories. I think he understands characters and motivation in a way that some of the people that have written these movies just don't. But anyway, okay.
No, I agree.
Well, we don't have our discussion of the last 6 issues scheduled yet, but I now really want to get it done sooner rather than later. So we'll try
Me
and figure out a time
too. Yes.
to do that. We may be in a situation where we can kind of get that done in place of a news episode in a couple weeks based on some travel and other things that we got coming up, but we'll figure that out off air. All right. Well, just want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our detour into some comics with a discussion of the first 6 issues of Legacy of Vader. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to make sure you catch our discussion of the last 6 issues, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get those downloaded to you automatically when they become available. We would appreciate it if you could rate and review, comment, like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is that your podcatcher of choice does, wherever you can do that. And if you want more Podcast Artists than what's likely to be available on your podcatcher of choice, I would direct you over to retrozap.com, where all previous 1,054 episodes can be found, as well as all the other great shows that are on the network. So, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Sure. So we can be found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. So very easy to find us. We also maintain some Pinterest boards. And if you need more places to listen to us, you can hit us up on our YouTube outlets. So we have both YouTube and YouTube Music. And we'd love to know what your thoughts are on these 6 issues or any of the other episodes that we've covered on all of our news, reviews, and discussion. And if you'd like to drop us a line, especially if it's something that doesn't fit really tidy into a social media comment or DM, you can email us at podcastartist@gmail.com. And you can also hit us up on our TeePublic store if you would like to grab some Podcast Artist merch. We have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun products. And you can, like I said, hit that up in our show notes. The link is there. And you can also go directly to teepublic.com and just search for us that way too.
All right. What do you got going on in cosplay?
Well, you can always find me on my Instagram, which is j.snipscosplay. So depending upon what I've got going on at the time, you can either find me as Ahsoka, Hera, the Fourth Sister, my original concept Mandalorian, and some other fun things as well. Tahiri Vela from Legends. We were talking about Legends, especially in our last news episode. So you can check that out at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Friday, we're going to wrap up the week with a look at some Star Wars news, and we will have the 9th Jedi trailer to discuss.
Yep.
That happened between us recording these last 2 episodes. I should have known, but hey, we got tired of waiting. And then on Monday next week, we'll be getting into our Clone Wars rewatch again with a look at episode 3 from season 4, which is the wrap up of the current story arc that happens on Mon Cala. All right. Thanks for listening to episode 1055 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.